Welcome to my garden. So you see here I have a lot of things planted. Most of them haven't sprouted yet, but here you can already see I got some tomatoes, I got some marigolds, some peppers, have herbs over here, got my shirts like a scarecrow, and I also have some math problems popping up. So I've had a lot of problems with deer and rabbits in the past. So I bought this, which is deer and rabbit repellent. It says, you see right here, it covers up to 2,000 square feet. So I need to know how many square feet I have in my garden, which I thought was going to be easy because to kill the weeds, I had covered it with a tarp.
Time out. Sorry, my kids started yelling. But what I was trying to say is that I made my garden a little bigger than the tarp. So on one side, it's about 2 feet longer than the tarp, and on the other side, it's about 3 feet longer.
But as you know, we've had a lot of crazy weather in Nashville, so the tarp blew all the way down there, and you can see it. It's like in a puddle covered with a bunch of heavy rocks and mud from a landslide, and now I don't know how big it is. So that's what I'm stuck with. How big is my garden? How can I figure it out so I can figure out how much deer and rabbit repellent to put on it so that all my hard work doesn't get eaten by the deer? T-Bone, you want to say hey?
We are going to talk about my garden as an intro into factoring. So I told you I started out by covering it with a tarp, and I know it's a square, but I don't know how long each side is. So this is a picture of the tarp. Since I don't know how long each side is, I'm just calling it X. I made my garden a little bigger than the tarp, so about 3 feet longer on one side and about 2 feet longer on the other side. And I want to know how much space my garden takes up total, because then I'll know how much deer repellent to put on it. So here's my question. How much space does my garden take up? Well, I know that to find the area of a rectangle, I just do length times width. So I just need to do x plus 2 times x plus 3. And here is what that's going to look like. And if you saw Miss Crandall's graphic, this is just sort of a description of how that works. My favorite way of multiplying this, and I need to multiply x plus 2 times x plus 3, is to use the box method. So I'm going to set it up here where I've got x plus 2 down here and x and a positive 3 right here. And I'm going to need to multiply each of these outer pieces by each other and put them in the box. So x times x is going to give me x squared, and that shows up right here in the box. And I went ahead and did that for you. I've got x times x is x squared. Here, x times 3 gives me 3x. 2 times x is 2x, and 2 times 3 is 6. And I see some things I can combine. I've got them circled right here. I just wrote it all out right up here for you to see. So I've got x squared plus 3x plus 2x plus 6. I can combine that 3x and that 2x together to get a 5x. So my garden takes up this much space. X squared plus 5x plus 6. But here's what's really cool, which is that is actually exactly how my garden works. So here I've shown you my garden where I've got the tarp right here and then my extra pieces. And so I know, I can think back to area of composite shapes, which we just finished up, that I could cut this big rectangle into smaller pieces and figure out the area of each of those smaller pieces. So I've got the area of this tarp is going to be x times x, that's x squared. Well, the area of this rectangle is going to be this length x times 3, so that's 3x. Here, this is going to be 2 feet times the length of the tarp, which is x, 2x, and this is 2 right here times 3 gives me a 6. So I can see each of these pieces, x squared plus 3x plus 2x plus 6, showing up, which I think is really cool. But that's not factoring, that's multiplying. Now we're going to look at factoring. So factoring is the opposite, it's the inverse. It's when I know how much space my garden takes up, but I don't know its dimensions. So imagine I knew how much space the garden took up, but I didn't know how long each side was. So here's another example. Here's another garden. I can tell it's smaller than my tarp. You can see, here's a picture of my tarp. And so what I'm going to try to do is figure out how to use this box method. What could go in here so that I can figure out what goes on the edges? Well, I know my x squared is going to go right here. And I know that the 8 is going to go here. So I can get that much set up. I know this is going to be x times x is x squared, and some number times some number equals 8. What I don't know yet is what those two numbers are. But since I know they multiply to make 8, I'm going to start out by making a list of everything that multiplies to make 8. So I've got 1 times 8 gives me 8, 2 times 4 gives me 8. I know I want these two to combine to make my middle number. My middle number in this case is negative 6. How do I get a negative number when I'm looking at a positive 8? Well, remember, a negative times a negative gives me positive. So negative 1 times negative 8 would give me positive 8. Negative 2 times negative 4 gives me positive 8. And those are the ones I'm going to choose because negative 2 minus 4 gives me that negative 6. So I can fill out the box. So it looks like this. Here I've got x times x is x squared. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. X times negative 4 is negative 4x. Negative 2 times negative 4 is positive 8. And these two combine to make that negative 6. So now I know the dimensions of my garden. And it makes sense that this would be subtraction because this garden is smaller than the tarp. So just to recap, we looked at this first situation where we knew the dimensions of the garden and we multiplied to figure out how much space it took up. What we're going to So maybe you're wondering how big my garden actually is, because I never told you what x is, or maybe you're not, but I don't know. So here's what happened. The truth is no one is going to use polynomials in their garden. Like really, no one, not even me. And so what I did is I went and looked at the tarp and Googled a company, but apparently tarp companies don't have a huge online presence. And so I couldn't figure out how big it was, and so I just kind of eyeballed it and took my little spray and sprayed the plants, and they're doing fine. No deer problems. The reason that we learn to factor polynomials is not because it's useful. It's not. I mean, I know a few people who really do it for a living, but for most of us, it's not. The reason we do it is because it's a fun little puzzle. It makes you think about multiplication and addition and subtraction all at the same time. And it just makes you do some critical thinking that makes you smarter. So don't worry if you don't think that you would ever use a polynomial to measure a garden in real life. I didn't either. What we're doing from here on out is this situation where I know how much space the garden takes up. And I use factoring to find its dimensions. So I've got 3 examples of that for you. No more gardens. Here's my first one. I've got x squared plus 11x plus 24. So I'm going to start out just looking for the factors of 24. That means the numbers that multiply to make 24. And I listed them out for you. I've got 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6. And my question is, which one of those combines to make 11? So I know I can start out with x plus something and x plus something. And I look at this list and say, okay, of these, 3 plus 8 gives me positive 11. So my answer is x plus 3 times x plus 8. That's my first example. Here's my next one. We haven't seen one of these yet. What happens if this last number is negative? Well, I'm still going to do what I've been doing, which is that I'm going to start out with x and x. And I'm going to list the factors of this number. So I've got 1 times 40, 2 times 20, 4 times 10, and 5 times 8. And this time I'm trying to make a 3. Well, I know in order to make a negative 40, I'm going to need a positive number multiplied by a negative number, which means that either these numbers or these numbers could be negative. And so I think, how could I combine these to get a positive 3? Well, if I had a positive 8 and a negative 5, 8 minus 5 gives me a 3, and positive 8 times negative 5 gives me a 40. And so really this is just like a puzzle. I look at all of the factors of 40, remember that it's a negative 40, so one of them is going to be negative, and see how to combine to make a 3. Here's my last example. I've got x squared minus 16. So this is different. I'm missing something. Usually I have a middle number. On all of these so far, I've had this middle number with just x's. I don't have one here. So if I don't have a middle number, that means I have literally nothing. And literally nothing is 0. So I could rewrite it to look like this. X squared plus 0x minus 16. Now I'm going to go through and make my same list of factors. So 1 times 16, 2 times 8, and 4 times 4. All of those make a 16. Which of these, and knowing this is a negative 16, so one of these numbers is going to need to be negative, which could I use to multiply to get negative 16, and when they add together, I get a 0. And so I'm going to have x times x is x squared. And then here, this plus 4 minus 4 is a 0. 4 times negative 4 gives me a negative 16.